The email arrived on a Tuesday morning in May while I was still in my bathrobe with my second cup of coffee. The subject line read, "Summer Childcare Schedule, Final." I opened it, and there was my name, typed in neat blue columns beside every Monday and Wednesday from June through August. 13 weeks. No phone call. No conversation. Nobody had asked me a single question. Let me take you back to how this all started. I'm 71 years old. My name is Ruth. I raised 3 children in the same modest house in northern Ohio where I still live, the house my late husband Gerald and I bought in 1983 for $62,000 and spent 4 decades filling with noise and food and life. When Gerald passed 6 years ago, my children worried about me rattling around in it alone. I told them I was fine. And I was. I had my garden, my library books, and my neighbor Connie who came over every Thursday evening for tea and conversation that stretched until 10 o'clock. I had a life. Small and full and mine. My children are good people. I want to say that and mean it, because everything I'm about to tell you is not a story about bad people. Daniel is 43, an accountant, very organized, very certain that organized is the same thing as right. My daughter Patrice is 40, a 4th-grade teacher, so busy she returns texts in bullet points. My youngest, Kevin, is 37 and works in sales, which means he is charming and optimistic and occasionally forgets that charm is not the same as consideration. Between the 3 of them, I have 5 grandchildren, ages 3 through 9. I love those children like I love breathing. But loving someone and being their unpaid full-time caretaker are 2 entirely different things, and somewhere along the way my family had let that line go very blurry. The summer schedule had been Patrice's idea, I found out later. She'd built it in a spreadsheet, her teacher instincts, I suppose. She sent it to Daniel and Kevin first. They approved it. Only then did it come to me. My name appeared in a column labeled caregiver. Not grandma. Not Ruth, if she's available. Just caregiver, like a slot you fill. I called Daniel that morning. He said, "Mom, we figured you'd be happy to help. You're home anyway." That phrase, "you're home anyway," settled in my chest like a stone at the bottom of a pond. I didn't argue. I said I'd think about it and hung up the phone. Then I drove to the community college. Here is something I have never told my children, not even once in 50 years. When I was 20 years old, I was accepted into the art program at Ohio State. It was 1974. I had a portfolio of watercolors that my professor called quietly extraordinary. He wrote me a letter I kept folded in my wallet for 3 months. I didn't go. My mother had taken ill, money was thin, and Gerald and I were already building a future together that I wanted more than I wanted anything else. I folded the portfolio up and put it in the bottom drawer of my bureau, and I went on with my life. What I found in that drawer the week after Gerald died is not something I talk about. The watercolors were still there. Soft and faded, the paper brown at the edges. Underneath them, tucked flat against the wood, was a flyer for a continuing education painting class at the community college. I have no idea how old it was or how it got there. I read it 3 times, standing in my bedroom in the quiet that follows a funeral. I wasn't ready to enroll then. I wasn't ready for anything. But I pinned the flyer to my refrigerator, and it stayed there for 6 years. I looked at it every morning. The first real slight came 2 weeks after the email. Patrice called to ask if I could go ahead and block the dates on my calendar. That phrase, "go ahead and," the way people say it when the answer is already yes and the asking is just paperwork. I asked whether she'd considered a summer camp program for the older children. She said camps cost money. She said, "Mom, you're right there." I said I knew where I lived. She laughed like I was being charming. I was not being charming. I got off the phone and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I looked at the flyer on my refrigerator. The summer session was still open, 8 weeks, Tuesday and Thursday mornings, 9 to noon. $48. I sat there thinking about what it means to be 71 years old and still waiting for someone to say, "Go ahead, Ruth. Your turn." The second escalation happened at Kevin's house, a Sunday dinner in early June. They had printed the spreadsheet and put it on the refrigerator. My name in blue, Mondays and Wednesdays, all the way through August, next to a sunflower magnet. Kevin's wife Amber said, very cheerfully, that childcare was handled. Daniel mentioned they might add Fridays in July if I was up for it. He said it the way you offer someone more potatoes. Like the answer could only be yes. I looked at that spreadsheet for a long moment. 5 adults had organized my entire summer without one conversation with me. I excused myself to use the restroom. I stood in Kevin's hallway, very still, one hand flat against the wall. And I made a decision. I drove home that evening and registered for the class online. $48. I pressed submit. The confirmation email arrived in 30 seconds. I printed it and set it next to the flyer on my refrigerator. Then I made chamomile tea and sat in Gerald's chair, and for the first time in a long while, I felt entirely like myself. I told no one. Not yet. I needed to do something that was fully mine before I explained it to anyone. The first Tuesday of class, I packed a canvas bag with pencils and a water bottle and drove to campus. The classroom smelled like turpentine and possibility. I was the second oldest person there. A man named Harold was 80 and had driven himself from Medina, which I found quietly inspiring. Our instructor was a young woman named Margot with paint-stained fingers and an unhurried way of explaining things as though there were no wrong answers, only information. I sat down at the long table, opened a fresh pad of watercolor paper, and felt something unlock in my chest that I hadn't known was locked. The following Thursday, Patrice called to confirm Monday drop-off. I told her I wasn't available Monday and Thursday mornings. I had a class. The pause was long enough that I checked to see if the call had dropped. A class, she said. Painting. At the community college. Tuesday and Thursday mornings. Mom. She said my name the way you do when you think someone is being difficult. We already told the kids. I understand, I said. I should have been consulted before you told the kids. I wasn't. She said she needed to call Daniel. That sounds fine, I said. Have a good evening, Patrice. The next 3 days were what I can only describe as a family weather event. Daniel called twice. Kevin texted 4 times. Amber sent a long message about what relying on family is supposed to mean. Someone, I believe it was Daniel, used the phrase "we thought you'd want to be involved." I kept my responses short and warm and clear. I was not available Tuesday or Thursday mornings. I was happy to discuss other arrangements. I was not angry. I was not punishing anyone. I simply had a commitment. What surprised me was what came next. They figured it out. Daniel found a part-time summer program for the 2 oldest grandchildren. Patrice shifted her hours on Tuesdays. Kevin and Amber hired a college student named Jess for 2 mornings a week. It was not seamless. There were stressed texts and confused pickups and at least one afternoon where everyone was uncertain who had Lily. But they managed. Because families do, when they have to. And I painted. Margot said I had a good instinct for color. She said it the way you'd say someone was good at reading a map, matter of fact, no fuss. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just kept showing up. I painted the view from my kitchen window. I painted Connie's hands around her teacup. I painted the old red barn on Route 9 that I'd driven past for 30 years without ever really stopping to see. In week 5, Margot asked if I'd consider submitting a piece to the Harmon County Art Fair. There was a category for adult learners. I thought about it for one day and said yes. I chose the barn painting. The light in it was right, late afternoon gold across old wood. Gerald had always loved that barn. The fair was the last Saturday of August, the same weekend the summer schedule ended. My children came. I hadn't invited them. Connie had mentioned it at church, and the word traveled the way it does in a family, faster than anyone intends. They brought all 5 grandchildren. I want to be honest, I did not win first place. A woman named Dolores took first with an oil painting of Lake Erie at sunset that was genuinely extraordinary. I found her afterward and told her so. I meant every word. I won second place in the adult learner category. There was a blue ribbon. There was a small cash prize. The judge said something about emotional clarity and the quality of the light. My grandson Marcus, who is 9 and takes everything seriously, stood in front of my barn painting for a long moment without saying a word. "Grandma," he said. "You made this?" "I did," I said. "It looks like a real painting," he said. "Marcus," I said, "it is a real painting." He looked at me the way children sometimes look at the people they've always known when something about those people becomes suddenly new. That look. I'll keep it somewhere safe for the rest of my life. In the parking lot afterward, Patrice put her arms around me and held on longer than she usually does. "Mom, I'm sorry we didn't ask you first," she said. "I know you are," I said. "We just assumed." "That's the part to remember," I said quietly. "The assuming." She nodded. We went to Connie's porch after, all of us, and ate pie in the late summer evening while the grandchildren ran through the yard catching fireflies. Everything was easy and good. That painting hangs in my kitchen now, blue ribbon and all, above the table where I have my morning coffee. Some mornings I look at it and I think about the 20-year-old who folded her watercolors into a drawer. I don't feel sad for her. She made the choices she needed to make, and they were good ones. But this Ruth, 71 years old, paint under her fingernails on a Tuesday morning, she is making different ones. And nobody has to say go ahead. I already know it's my turn. Fall semester begins in 3 weeks. I signed up for the intermediate course. I already paid. Tell me in the comments, is there something you set aside years ago that you've finally gone back to? I'd love to hear your story.